definition of a for-profit corporation is someone who does everything in their...
Wait a minute. No. Hold up. Let him cook. Wait. Hold up. Is he refusing to ascribe a moral imperative and simply saying that this is how capitalism is?
There's people getting rich off this graph.
He made a video called "Who Gets Rich Off the Poor?" Ronald McDonald's socialism arc. Okay, I'm obviously memeing. We'll see what he says. I suspect that there's still stuff in here that I will disagree with.
What we're looking at here is the number of Americans that don't make enough money for basic survival. So like a family of 4, 2 parents, 2 kids, living off of $31,000 a year or less. That's considered poverty in the United States, and there's millions of people who live with that kind of income. The US government spends about $1 trillion every year helping these people meet their basic needs. In recent decades, a lot of that money has been flowing through a middleman, private corporations who are supposed to be more efficient in administering this money.
So welfare is big business, and of course that's the irony of this whole thing, that there's so much money to be made from poverty.
Okay, what is happening? What the hell is going on? I'm scared. Why is he talking about this? I'm scared, chat.
Now, this is not easy stuff to understand. We're talking about government welfare programs and bureaucracy. Sometimes they're intentionally hard to understand, and these corporations don't...
If the Chi-Coms gave this man money before they gave me money, I swear to God, I'll do an Alex Jones pivot, by the way. I'm being so for real. Do you understand me? You will hear anti-Chinese propaganda like you've never heard before out of sheer envy. I have been your most loyal servant for almost a decade. If you were to take me off the list because you've gotten the propaganda for free and instead fund and funnel money into the likes of former CIA agents like Ronald McDonald, I swear to God, I'll drop this whole thing. I'll forget about Chinese century of prosperity overnight. You understand me?
Really want to be known by anyone. But if you start to dig, which we've been doing, and you look deep enough into this, you start to see what all of this actually looks like. Who's actually getting rich, what the incentives are within this system, where the loopholes are, and whether or not this is actually benefiting the people that it's designed to benefit. So in this video, I'm going to show you who gets rich off the poor, and I'm just going to do a few case studies that demonstrate how this works. I'll be making a list of examples here, going from what I see as the least egregious abuse of this system to the most. I am bracing myself to get sued or intimidated by the companies that I'm...
What? Okay, dude, chill. I don't think they're gonna come after you, big dog. Yeah, China be like, why buy the cow if the cow gives the milk for free?
Calling out in this video because that's how a lot of these powerful shadowy companies work. So as always, every assertion in this video is rigorously fact-checked and in my sources. Lawyers, go check that first before you send me your cease and desist order. Thank you. And with that, let's look at who gets rich off the poor. Let's go back to this graph one last time and just...
Bro, that's amazing. What is it in the minds of people? Unless you're just LARPing, what is in the minds of people that, like, when they hear a guy finally say, like, you know, capitalism's kind of up, like, it's got to be a meme, right? Like, there's no way this guy's being for real. Like, Johnny Harris is a capitalist, dude. How the is it that when he goes, hey, man, there's a lot of private enterprise here that takes advantage of the welfare state, effectively working as a middleman and underserving the already underserved working poor, and immediately be like, oh, Air Max. There's an element of truth to this. No, there isn't an element of truth to it. What the are you talking about? This guy was literally trolling. You're stupid. You're so stupid that you fell for a guy who was being facetious. You admitted that your moral system is so broken fundamentally that a guy who is literally fibbing, okay, is actually there's a hidden kernel of truth in that. No, there isn't.
Zoom back to the 1950s, where you can see that the poverty rate was double what it is today. It's like 22%. This was really bad, and it led to the president at the time declaring war.
And this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America. We shall not rest until that war is won.
So, A War on Poverty by Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964. This is what that war looked like. This big line. This is social spending as a share of GDP. You can see this is where he gives this speech right here, this flat line. Social spending just skyrockets right after. The government spends tons of money for this war on poverty. That money goes towards programs like Medicare and Medicaid, food stamps, public education, which is why you see...
Bro, I swear to God, since World War II, America lost every war, dude. War on poverty, war on drugs, Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan. What war have we won, dude? Holy, I'm thinking about it. It's like Grenada. We're over here talking about invading Greenland, dude. It's crazy. The last time we won a war, we got straight hard carried by the USSR. I guess the Cold War. That's the one long war of attrition. Don, look at Asian Jito. Does that mean small head? They would never do that. Xi Jinping would never say that, especially because he has been rewarded handsomely with such a large head. And I think that's bullshit. He would never say that to me.
See this big dip from 22% all the way down to 12, 13%. And for a time, all this spending worked. Poverty declined 30% in 5 years. But eventually progress slowed and the government kept spending and people got tired of it. The economy wasn't doing well and people were tired of subsidizing these welfare programs. And that's where this guy comes in.
My friends, some years ago, the federal government declared war on poverty, and poverty won.
This is where things start to get a little bit murky, so we needed help. We got it from Ann Kim, who is an expert who literally wrote the book on this history and the modern day poverty economy, and sat down with us to talk through this history and how it works today.
Remember during the 1980s, we had this, well, no, you don't remember the 1980s. Well, during the 1980s, there was really this mythologization, if that's a word, of the CEO. At the same time, the government spending was ballooning. Economic times were not that great. So Americans were not feeling particularly generous about funding social services programs. And so the CEOs were really kind of held up on a pedestal as the ones who are going to make government just as efficient as they made their own companies.
Poverty is a big business here in the United States, and the government is making decisions right now that will affect millions of people. And yet, what I've been finding is it's hard to keep up on all of this, how this stuff is being reported, and what is trustworthy and factual.
Let me guess, ground news will help you keep track of all of this, right? Oh, wow. I'm so surprised. Here, I'm going to show you his code.
I view. Ground News is completely subscriber funded, doesn't rely on corporate influences to decide what you see. And if you want to join the platform, you can get 40% off the Vantage plan, which has all of these features I talked about today. You get 40% off if you use my link or scan the QR code. Ground.news/Johnny Harris is the link. It comes out to be like $5 a month for this, which to me is an affordable price to be better informed and to have a more critical view of the news you're consuming. So sign up now, ground.news/Johnny Harris. Thanks Ground News for sponsoring today's video and for existing. Okay, back to our list of who gets rich off the poor.
So it's the 1980s. Reagan wants to rein in all of this spending. He's also afraid that Americans are becoming too reliant on the welfare system. So he kicks off a bunch of changes that over time would lead to a fundamental shift in delivering income support to low-income populations.
They wanted to privatize Medicaid, Medicare, prisons, air traffic control.
This privatization of government spending started under Reagan, but it continued into the future administrations, especially under Bill Clinton, who helped expand it.
Oh, yeah.
And the fundamental shift looks like this. We're going to be using a graphic like this, not only for right now, but for the future cases of how this works today. Taxpayers give money to the government. The government used to give money to citizens in need directly. But after these reforms, the money would start to be distributed to the states. The states would then hire for-profit companies to do the complicated work of distributing this money to eligible people in need. They would be responsible for making sure that no one's abusing the system, determining who's eligible and who's not. And the thinking here was that the government is much less efficient than private companies. And that is true in most cases. And that if we apply business and the free market and profit motives to welfare, that the for-profit companies would make this more efficient, less government spending, less waste, and less over-reliance on the welfare system. And the big part of all of this is that there would be more requirement for people to be looking for a job or be working in order to qualify for benefits. And who would verify that applicants are actually working? These for-profit companies. And so this is how our welfare system works today, in a very kind of American way. It is administered by private companies that you've never heard about, who are given lots of money from the government to dole it out to people in need.
So Reagan started this privatization train. And it was really President Bill Clinton who not only hopped on board that train, but got it accelerating to its destination, which was total privatization of a lot of social services in America.
Okay, so that's the context here. It's been 45 years since this big experiment began of privatizing our welfare system. And I've always wondered, did this work? So that's sort of been the curiosity at the heart of this
No.
story. Is government more efficient? Are we saving money? Is this helping vulnerable populations in a more efficient way? The answer is, in some cases, yes. There have been positive outcomes of outsourcing to contractors within the welfare system and public spending. A good example of that is food stamps that used to come in these paper coupons, but now are delivered electronically on a debit card. This is more
The government could do that. There is literally no need for that to be handled privately. The government could do that. Every single thing that people say, oh, in this private-public partnership, privatization actually was truly beneficial. No, you're just paying an expensive middleman who year over year is going to increase the prices and greatly expand the amount of money spent on social welfare while still offering the same, if not a diminished level of social welfare. It is the exact same principle behind private healthcare in this country. You look at the cost of healthcare expanding year over year. You look at Medicaid and Medicare expanding. The numbers are insane. You're like, oh my God, we're spending so much money on this. It's like, yeah, the reason why we're spending so much money on this is because we're still going back to private insurance as a middle manager that's driving up the cost because they have no interest in lowering the costs across the board. As a matter of fact, it's literally beneficial for private healthcare in certain circumstances to increase the cost. It is an unnecessary middleman that does not need to exist, that quite literally works to explode the cost of all of these services that would be infinitely more efficient if handled by the government. America and the private-public partnership in the United States of America is one of the biggest nuisances. It truly contributes to our GDP skyrocketing. It really does. It is one of the major reasons why our GDP is as vast as it is, as large as it is. Having said that, however, the services at the end state on the client side are still dog. So we spend more than everybody else and we get worse or even less money, less monetary help, or less services, a diminished service at the end on the client side in comparison to other places. All that does is create an economy around expensive middlemen that should not even exist. It is in every aspect of our lives. Genuine question, why do you not think Ronald Reagan is the worst president of all time? I do. What are you talking about? Ronald Reagan is the worst American president, I would say, even though there's a long list of evil demons, including slave owners. I think Ronald Reagan's impact on America and the globe as a whole is tough to beat. It's him and George W. Bush that have done untold amounts of pain to the entirety of the planet. Reagan himself was a product of his era, of course, simply just an actor working alongside the international vision of neoliberalism.
secure,
yeah.
it's more efficient. It ensures that people use these for food. There are a lot of instances where private companies have made government spending more efficient, but the purpose of this video is to shine a light on the many instances where private companies have gotten really rich off of this system in a way that has not benefited the most vulnerable and needy people in our country.
I don't know. It might be George W. Bush's administration that might be the worst. But I think Ronald Reagan still set the stage for George W. Bush. And I guess Carter set the stage for Reagan, but God, every president is so bad. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to point the fingers at, like, especially in contemporary administrations, like it's hard to point the finger at like one guy. Who's the best president? FDR. And even he did a whole bunch of awful, cutting out black people from the New Deal, Japanese internment camps, but it's not even close. In a field of monstrous administrations, FDR stands alone. Even with all of the negative impacts of his, even with all the negative consequences, Abe Lincoln was pretty good too, even though he also had, again, a bunch of issues. What about Lincoln? Yeah, Abe Lincoln was pretty solid. But I still think that, the abolition of slavery was more of an inevitability than even the New Deal was, or even which side we landed on World War II. It's hard to figure out. It's hard to figure out which would be, I think Abe Lincoln is more consequential with that. We need a tier list, maybe. Abraham Lincoln said he didn't care about slavery one way or another. He would go with whatever would give him the most clout. Okay, calm down, dude. All right, let's keep going.
Country, the poor, the elderly, children in need, the disabled. So finally, the reason you clicked on this video, let's draw up this list of who gets rich off the poor. And for that, I'm gonna need to look at all these papers, so we need more space. Let's go to the big table. Okay, so the first one on our list is slightly adjacent to the privatization of welfare, but it follows the same incentives and dynamics. And it has to do with taxes. One of the ways that the government subsidizes the lives of lower income people is through a tax credit. So when you file your tax...
Okay, speaking of Abe Lincoln, one last thing I want to mention is that it is very funny that Republicans will talk about how, like, the Democrats were, the Dixiecrats, or Abe Lincoln was a Republican, whatever right? And it's so funny because, like, in the time of Abe Lincoln, the Republican Party's credo literally featured the abolition of chattel slavery in the South and wage slavery in the North. It was the closest any major party has ever been to Marxism in American history. That was the Republican Party. Think about that. Like, this is a part of American history that's often not mentioned. Not only was Karl Marx a major glazer of old Abe and Abraham, he was a marabou himself. He wrote letters. Abe never responded as far as we know. I don't think there's any information on whether he ever responded to Karl Marx or not. But Abe Lincoln, gay, maybe bisexual. We don't know. But the Republican Party's official, the original credo of the Republican Party was to engage in the abolition of chattel slavery in the South and wage slavery in the North. The real red party. Red with the spirit of capitalism, or I couldn't even say it right. Red with the spirit of communism in pre-communist, in a pre-communist society. I can't even get myself to hypothetically say the Republicans are red for. I was about to say capitalism again. Oh my God.
Taxes, you show that you've been working, you've made money, but you didn't make that much money, and therefore you qualify for an earned income tax credit. If you have kids, it goes up and it kind of maxes out at around $7,000. This is a very simple thing. In a lot of countries, you like check a box and you get this refund or this subsidy to your life. But in the United States, it looks like this. This is a 45-page instruction manual about all the specifics on the earned income credit, something that should be so simple, and that is a key way of helping lower income people live their lives. The tax code here in the United States is deathly complicated, intentionally designed to be so, to make certain companies rich. And this is one way that works. I have a lot of feelings about this. I made a whole video on the New York Times about this very thing, but I didn't focus on this aspect of it. Because it's so complicated,
Yeah, that's by design, as Johnny also knows. That is literally by design. And sometimes they'll make it even more complicated, also by design. where they'll just make it inaccessible. Like they'll close up the pathways where you could receive potentially receive this aid. Like during COVID, when the state of Florida deliberately made their website unusable.
Low-income people who qualify for this credit don't want to fill it out themselves, and so they go to a tax preparer. Enter this guy. Well, not this guy specifically, but a guy like this, representing a company like this, Liberty Tax.
Also, they make money. I forgot. This is opportunity for bounty. More of that private-public partnership that the American government absolutely loves. A middleman that will solve the inefficiencies that we have directly created. Sometimes the middleman itself petitions the government, lobbies the government to create these inefficiencies so they can fill that void and make money.
Is one of many tax preparation companies that advertise to low-income people to come in so that they can prepare their taxes and get them in on the earned income tax credit. But we now know they do so using some pretty shady means. There's a lawsuit. Lawsuit. District of Columbia versus Liberty Tax Service. Liberty Tax was recently sued for luring low-income people by saying that they will prepare their taxes for them, only to deceive these customers by secretly skimming extra money off the top of their tax refund, which remember includes the earned income tax credit that is meant to subsidize their lives. Liberty Tax also gives out loans to people, saying that they can pay them back once they get their tax refund.
But what that really has done is create a market for high-interest fast cash products like refund anticipation loans or refund anticipation checks, which are basically just payday loans that are secured by the refund. And so this predatory industry has grown to take advantage of the complexity of an incredibly important benefit that a lot of poor people count on every year.
These loans would often come with high interest rates and unexpected fees. In fact, the pricing in all of this has been kind of a black box, allowing Liberty Tax to take advantage of low-income Americans trying to get in on the benefit that they are entitled to because of this tax credit. Okay, and this is where I have to come clean. I worked for this company. Not for very long, and not in any high position. I was one of these Statue of Liberty guys. One winter, I was home from university waiting for a security clearance for an internship at NATO, and I needed money. And so I found this job being the Statue of Liberty holding this sign. I didn't know what the sign said, okay? But it probably said something like, "Need money today? Apply for a $500 to $6,250 easy advance." In other words, I was probably a part of luring desperate people in to get a bad loan or to have their tax refund skimmed by this corporation. I had no idea, and I'm sorry. Liberty is just one of many corporations who has gotten in on these schemes, targeting low-income people to try to get in on their tax credits. And to me, this is actually a failure of our tax system. For this segment of the population, this should be a very easy thing like it is in every other country. A box on a free government website that you can fill out in 5 minutes. But instead, we've got a privatized corporate middleman who is making all of this money off the poor. Okay, number 2, housing. So here in the US, instead of building big public housing complexes like they do in some countries and like we used to do, the privatized version of the American government gives vouchers to low-income people and allows them to go choose a house, and the government will basically pay for a portion of their rent. This is called Section 8 housing. And there are landlords that specialize in renting to Section 8 tenants, getting this government subsidy voucher that goes to pay for the rent. But what you find is that some of these landlords jack up their prices because they know the government will pay for it. Like here in DC, an apartment that should cost $1,600 a month, the landlord might charge almost $1,000 more, like $2,500 a month, well above the market price, knowing that the government, who has poor oversight over this program, won't pick up on this and will...
Yeah, y'all heard that? He had a internship at NATO. I didn't miss that. I know he had an internship at NATO. That's why I say he's CIA. You guys got a little insight into how I play with Kaya normally. Why are Mormons always getting tricked into being evil? That's so funny. Beat her ass like that.
Subsidize that inflated price.
Don't you use minoxidil? Is it not poisonous for your dog? I put it in my head. And then I also Not only do I put it on my head, but I also wash my hands after applying it because I know it is poisonous for my dog. Also, I think her being 100 pounds also helps in this regard as well. But I've never had her be anywhere near the minoxidil. Are you stupid? She's my daughter and she's precious. It's so funny when people try to test me on my dog training and my dog welfare when like she is the best trained dog you've ever seen. Why would your assumption be that I would ever put her life at risk? The pill is finasteride. Minoxidil is just Rogaine, chatters.
Now, I'm not just making this up. Those are real numbers from an investigation here in DC by the Washington Post, who found that the DC government is overpaying thousands of apartments to the tune of $1 million every month here in Little DC. But this is happening all over the country, enriching landlords while depleting the assisted housing fund, all while distorting the market. Like, this is not free market. This is a totally distorted thing. Number 3 on our list is corporate middlemen, which is kind of a big section. I'll try to work through it fairly concisely, but it's kind of the biggest one here. This is where a lot of people get really rich off the poor. Remember from our history section just a few moments ago that Ronald Reagan shook up the welfare system by, instead of giving...
Ronald McDonald Reagan.
Money directly to people in need, instead giving it to the states, who would then give it to a corporate middleman who would then distribute it. And that corporate middleman also had to kind of determine the eligibility of people, making sure they're working or they're looking for a job. And all of that is a lot of work, and these corporations were the ones to be doing it.
So these are the folks who are getting government contracts to act as government in running welfare programs. They're basically agents of the government. They're mercenaries for the public sector. They're making huge decisions that benefit the everyday lives of low-income people. One of these companies, for instance, was a company called Maximus, which is one of the largest welfare services providers today. They had revenues of about $88 million in 1995, and just a few years later, their revenues were already up to $500 million. And today,
just shave your head. There's a little unknown toxic side effect of Rogaine. It destroys joints and cartilage. And I know you know this. Wait, what? Is there? I didn't know that. And no, I'm not going to shave my head, dude. What are you talking about?
they're a $4.9 billion business.
Now, this was exactly the point for Reagan and his reformers. These corporate middlemen were supposed to be much more efficient in administering this government money. And indeed, they are for-profit companies and they operate much more efficiently than the government itself, cutting costs and looking for ways to do things more efficiently. But let's remember, this is not like a normal corporation like McDonald's that is selling a product to a customer that can go somewhere else. Let's see what happens. A few years ago, Maximus took...
I hope he's going to say efficiency in this process just means diminished services, right? Efficiency for McDonald's, you know, one can make the argument is good or something. I don't know. I'm not in favor of efficiency in private corporations either, because in many circumstances, efficiency simply means increasing productivity and displacing the pre-existing labor force and keeping prices relatively low. But in terms of efficiency in a private public sector arrangement, that literally means diminished services, finding ways to not pay people, and also maximizing the pay that you're getting from the government.
Took over Tennessee's health insurance program, state-run health insurance program. It's called Medicaid. And what you saw is that many children and elderly people very quickly were booted out of the program. They were found ineligible. There was a 23% increase.
Say goodbye to streaming. If you take DHT blockers, no one will watch you. DHT blockers will ruin your energy levels and ruin your streaming career. I don't know if you know this, but since I started taking DHT blockers approximately 6 years ago, I went from 300 viewers to 30,000. So I think the exact opposite has happened.
In the number of uninsured children in the state.
What is going on, dude? What's happening in the chat? I've been pretty open about taking minoxidil and finasteride for literally 6+ years. Are you guys just trying to stun lock me or something?
That's more than any other state at the time, 2018. It took me a while to get my head around this. Like, why would a for-profit company want to kick children and old people off of the state health insurance program? I'll explain in just a sec, but let's look at one more example. In 2016, Maximus took over the Medicaid program in Kansas. And soon thereafter, applicants started to see huge delays in their applications. Backlogs started to build up, which, remember what we're talking about here. This isn't abstract. This is vulnerable people, in this case, mostly elderly people, not being able to access their basic health needs for weeks and sometimes months because their application was pending for a very long time, meaning Maximus was working on it, but presumably very slowly. And that's because children and low-income people and elderly people are not Maximus's customer. They do not have an incentive to serve those people, partly because those people can't go anywhere else. Those people think that they're interacting with the government. They don't know who Maximus is. And mostly because their main job is to get more government contracts and then to cut costs so that they can capture as much of that government contract as profit. So in this case, what that means is cutting staff, making it as cheap as possible to process these applications. This answers my question about why a company like Maximus would want to get people off the rolls, to deem them ineligible for these benefits, because it's cheaper for them. They are motivated to find people who do not qualify and to pare down their list so they have fewer people to work on, which is less cost for them. So yes, there is cost cutting and efficiency that's happening here, but it happens to be at the expense of vulnerable, needy people who the government is trying to give money to. Now, actually, I don't blame Maximus very much for this. I don't think they're bad people. I think they provide a very useful service in most cases. We should expect a corporation to behave like this. The definition of a for-profit corporation is someone who does everything in their...
Wait a minute. No. Hold up. Let him cook. Wait. Hold up. Is he refusing to ascribe a moral imperative and simply saying that this is how capitalism is, only helping you arrive at the conclusion that it is an immoral system in and of itself? Because that is, welcome back, Karl Marx, you know? Not like he's saying that, this companies are not moral actors. They simply operate at the behest of the profit incentive. It is the incentives within the system that has been normalized that is the issue here. Just saying.
Their power to make money for their company. That is their job. So without proper oversight and competition and regulation and performance review, these corporations should be...
Oh my God. Oh, damn. My bad. It just was... It's not the private-public partnership that is at fault here. It's simply that the government hasn't regulated it appropriately. Oh, man. If only there was more regulation from the government, and then there would be more abundance.
Expected to minimize...
Yeah. He turned it around and said, real capitalism hasn't been tried yet. I mean, he's not like a libertarian or whatever. I think he's more so a social democrat. I love how Dodge is reversing what Reagan. I love how
minimize the resources they have to put into processing applications and administering benefits.
Yeah, and what we need is a public-private partner who can oversee the profits for the middlemen. What we need is more middlemen. That's right. Instead of making the government do this service as it does virtually everywhere. Sorry, I apologize. Stop sniffing. Stop sniffing. You're gross. Anyway, instead of having the government seize control over these initiatives as it has in virtually every other competent and comparable OECD nation, we need another middleman, maybe even a private one that is just like a regulatory agency that regulates the regulators, I think. And then we can hire more people, and then more CEOs can make money that way. That'll fix it.
Another point of fairness here. If you look at the financials of Maximus, they're not some crazy profitable company. Yes, they bring in billions of dollars. They've captured a huge amount of this government services market. Their gross profit margin is 20%, which seems like a lot. But if you actually look at their net profit margin, which is kind of their more typical profit margin, it's like 3%.
Then, okay, so is private healthcare. Private healthcare margins are so low. Private healthcare margins are so low. Why is there a government services industry? Why isn't it just the government? If it's so goddamn low, if the net profit margin is around 3% and that's so low, so low, then abolish it. That's my argument. Like, if you are a capitalist, and this is where the capitalist dogma shelters you from recognizing the truth. It stunts your imagination, where you have the horse blinders on, and no matter how much you can dream of a beautiful future, if you're still locked into the dogmatic ways of thinking within the structures of capitalism, you ultimately still have this underlying attitude that corporations are also magnanimously doing things. Even after you describe that this is just how corporations are. Corporations are supposed to work for profit. That's what for-profit corporations do, which is why we need more regulation on top of this. Okay, how about no regulation in that field? That is a necessity because it's run by the government.
That's a pretty poor performance for a company. They're not insanely profitable. The CEO did make $7.3 million last year in full compensation, and they did spend over $1 million in lobbying and funding elections. My point here is corporate middlemen who administer welfare are not robber barons, and they're not running some corrupt scheme, but they are for-profit corporations who will cut costs where they can. And if they're not held accountable for doing that, the people who suffer are the people who are already vulnerable and needy in our country, which is what all these programs are meant to help.
Because they're one of only a handful of companies that are in this business, you can get away with a lot of behaviors that may not fly in a more competitive marketplace.
I remember interacting with these companies. I didn't know I was interacting with them until I started reporting the story, but when my son was like 1.5, he was diagnosed with autism, and we started to look around for services, realized our insurance didn't cover anything, so we went to Medicaid.
Dude, this is why we watch Donald McDonald, Mr. CIA Harris, okay? The reason why we watch him is because we disagree with him, chatters. That's the whole point.
And we qualified. And my wife spent hours and hours on the phone with what I now know was a corporate middleman trying to work through these applications and processes, and it was mind-numbing.
Yeah, Johnny is the insight into the liberal mind, as is Asman the mind of the conservative. We get to understand what conservatives are saying, doing, and thinking, what motivates them when we look at the Asmongold chat and Asmongold. Just as it's important to understand the fascinating mind of a liberal, Johnny Harris gives us fair insight.
Complicated and difficult, and the wait times were so long, and the paperwork and the hoops that we had to jump through. And I remember feeling a lot of anger at the inefficiency of the government. The government has no incentive to perform because we're not their customer. What I realize now is that I was dealing with a corporation. I was not the customer. Was not the customer. My son, Henry, who needed services, was not the customer. And in fact, complicated forms and more wait times and process is actually more business for these corporate middlemen. They have an incentive to sell more paperwork to all of us. To me, that is a distortion of what Ronald Reagan dreamt about, of corporations swooping in and making our government more efficient. Okay, that's corporate middlemen. Let's move on to number 4. Medicaid dentists. Now, I've had some positive experiences with Medicaid. When I was a freshly married, in my young 20s university student with no insurance, and we had our first baby, I got hit with a $10,000 bill from the hospital and freaked out and went to the billing department at the hospital, and they told me about this magical thing called Medicaid for someone like me who was very low income at the time. And lucky for me, whoever the benefits contractor in Utah was handled it very well, and it really saved my bacon. But if you look at all sides of Medicaid, you start to see entire industries that exist to take advantage of the Medicaid system. A good example of this is dentistry.
It's created an enormous business opportunity for some dentists who see that they can make a living treating exclusively Medicaid patients.
Unlike regular private insurance, Medicaid doesn't reimburse very much for dental procedures. So because of that, a lot of dentists don't take Medicaid as an insurance. And on the other side, there are some dentists that only take Medicaid. They specialize in appealing to patients who qualify for Medicaid, getting them in, and doing as many procedures as possible to get in on those Medicaid benefits. And once again, if we're talking rational corporate behavior and incentives, these offices will often target lower income or disabled or elderly patients who are
less likely to advocate for themselves and against medically unnecessary procedures.
So inevitably what's
Nay.
happened over time is that this
I don't know how
market
to
has
do
turned
that.
into a very exploitative one, where dentists have been prosecuted for charging for procedures that didn't exist or procedures that were completely unnecessary. For instance, there was a dentist in North Carolina who was prosecuted for having performed 17 root canals on a 3-year-old toddler.
Oh yeah, this is insane.
And it's not just one bad apple in North Carolina. This is a lawsuit where the US government settled with a company called Cool.
Was it? I think this literally was the company that was it TrueAnon, or I think I remember either TrueAnon or Chapo talking about this company and what they did.
Smiles. And they are
There's like a weird there's a company in Florida that has like a weird connection to people connected to Matt Gaetz. So I do think that it was TrueAnon that talked about this. Yeah, the 17 root canals on a baby is like something that I recall hearing.
a Medicaid-specific dental franchise who had to pay close to $24 million because an investigation found that they were performing dental operations that were not medically necessary. They were taking advantage of poor patients in order to get more money from Medicaid. According to the lawsuit, they performed tooth extractions, gave out stainless steel crowns, did root canals on babies that did not need them. Like, there are multiple things really wrong with this. Obviously, exploiting a government system to deplete the Medicaid fund is one aspect, but performing like dental surgery.
My wife is a dentist, and this is completely misconstruing the truth, brother. He is literally talking about things that have already been prosecuted in a court of law. He didn't make that up. Unless you're saying the justice system is unfairly maligning big, brave Medicaid dentists that do unnecessary dental work in an effort to farm Medicaid payments. This isn't to say every dentist operates like this. No, he's not saying all Medicaid dentists do this.
Surgeries on people, root canals on babies for money is a level of greed
Unless your wife got prosecuted, in
and
which
corporate
case
exploitation that I cannot really get my head around. But again, in a world where companies will maximize profits, this is to be expected if the incentive structure is set up that way. Let's get to number 5, which is similar to the dental clinics, but it has to do with kidneys. Here in the US, lower income people are disproportionately plagued with kidney failure, a disease where your kidneys fail and your blood can't be cleaned by your kidneys, so you need a machine called a dialysis machine to clean your blood for you. Luckily, since the 70s, the United States now heavily subsidizes people who need dialysis for their...
This was ironically Richard Nixon, wasn't it? Am I crazy? Am I misremembering? Yeah, Richard Nixon signed Social Security amendments in 1972, which created the end-stage renal disease. Nixon signed the bill that was experimental at the time to cover all medical expenses for anyone diagnosed with kidney failure. Richard Nixon, Maoist third worldist, opened up China to the world. Remember that. Okay? EPA, kidney dialysis machines for all. Opening up China to the world. Just saying. These are important things to remember when talking about the often misunderstood Nixon regime.
Their kidneys. And dialysis is meant to be a temporary intervention while you wait for a kidney transplant. There's always a long waiting list for a kidney transplant, so you're on dialysis until you can get a transplant, which increases your chances of living. It is a wonderful thing that the government subsidizes this because it saves a lot of lives. But inevitably, here comes the exploitation.
Overnight, it instantly created an industry opportunity to offer dialysis.
Disadvantaged people need more dental work than those who can afford to go every 6 months. Disabled people have more complex dental cases. Dentists should be able to make a living off of Medicaid exclusive work. We need more dentists and access to dental care for this guy. I think you guys are misunderstanding the point that he's making. I don't think he's talking about every dentist, every Medicaid dentist. Politics is dead. There's no left or right, only rich or poor.
Dialysis, because now the government was going to pay for it.
One of these companies is called DaVita. I think they're the largest dialysis center company in the United States. And because of this set of incentives, we can start to piece together how they would behave.
And the thing again about dialysis is Like Medicaid dentistry, it's a volume business. The government pays dialysis centers per treatment, and last year was about $380 per treatment. So it is unfortunately in the interest of dialysis companies that run dialysis centers to keep those machines occupied as many hours of the day as they can, to cycle through as many patients as they can, because an empty dialysis machine is $380 that they're not making.
Okay, so a company making sure that their machines are being used at full capacity is actually, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. That is a company using its resources efficiently, administering a life-saving treatment. But that's kind of just the beginning. What you see in these for-profit dialysis centers is less staff to help with the treatment, and you see higher death rates. And this is where it becomes so clear where the failure is. You see 17% fewer referrals for kidney transplant, meaning these people who are on a temporary dialysis intervention, who are supposed to be waiting for a kidney transplant, are kept on the machines longer because a for-profit company makes money the longer they are in the chair. So why would they refer them to get a kidney transplant when they make more money keeping them on the dialysis treatment? If someone gets a transplant, that is a lost customer.
Unfortunately, it's an option that's being denied a lot of people because it's in the financial interest of dialysis centers to keep someone in dialysis rather than, quote, losing them to transplant.
Now, DaVita has paid like $1 billion in settlements and for some of this behavior, including $350 million they had to pay after being sued by the US government for paying doctors to go out to recruit people to come to their dialysis centers so that they could corner the market in certain areas. They had to pay another $450 million because they were found billing the government for medicine that they had received and just thrown out, and charged the government anyway so that they could get reimbursed. All of this, once again, further draining the money that is allocated by our government to help people in need. And finally, number 6, the last on our list, the one I'm deeming the most egregious because it has to do with children. And not just any children, the most vulnerable children in our society. Specifically children who have been removed from their family because of abuse, abandonment, or death. Foster children. If a foster child loses a parent or is physically or mentally disabled, the federal government entitles them to around $700 a month to subsidize their lives. This is one that goes straight from the federal government, from the Social Security Fund, straight to these children, or at least it should. But here comes the corporate middlemen once again. States will often hire corporate middlemen like Maximus, who is in fact a part of this, to look through the databases of foster children to identify which of those children qualify for this benefit, meaning which of these children have a dead parent or are physically or mentally disabled. And then to go through the process of diverting that money.
Whoa. Kaya! Oh my God. Kaya, please. You're being real bad right now. I have pomegranate molasses that my mom that my dad got for my mom. She dropped the bottle and it broke, and then it started spilling everywhere. And because her car was running, she had to go outside and quickly turn off her car. I cleaned it up in the process, but that's what's going on in the background.
Away from the children and into state coffers. The state says they're doing this to help supplement the foster care program in their state to help boost their budget. But what feels very icky about this to me is that it creates, once again, a business opportunity for a for-profit company who is incentivized to scour these databases looking for children who qualify for this benefit to divert the money away from them and towards the state. And Maximus gets paid a fee to do this. They're incentivized to do this as a service for the state, to look through these databases and look for children who qualify. There's one NPR report from a while back that reports that the corporate middleman Maximus, who we've talked about at length here, and who I will probably get sued by, would get $1,600 per child that they found who qualified for this benefit. And remember, a child whose parents are dead or who has a physical or mental disability, who's entitled to around $700 a month to supplement their very difficult life.
If Maximus finds that child and diverts that money into state coffers, Maximus gets paid $1,600. That was in Alaska. Oh, but it's still going on. In 2018, Washington State worked with Maximus to get $6.89 million of foster children's money. Wisconsin got $4.13 million from their foster children, thanks again to the services of Maximus. Illinois, $18.7 million from foster children. Illinois didn't work with Maximus in this case, but another similar corporate middleman called Diversified Services Network to do the same thing. None of these companies want to be known or spoken out loud. They just sort of operate as like a proxy for the government. This is what they do.
I saw the Supreme Court 9-0 ruling. Supreme Court says Trump administration must facilitate return of Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador. And no, this is not the Supreme Court going woke, chat. Okay? This is the Supreme Court saying this is our limit. Okay? Our limit is when you violate a previous court order and erroneously, without due process, send someone to El Salvador. You cannot turn around and claim as though you have no mechanism of bringing them back, especially because, I mean, this is important. This is important because this is like either a constitutional crisis or the Trump administration takes the L. If the SCOTUS went along with this, this would mean that like the judiciary is gone. There's no power to the judiciary at all, and we'll see. We'll see what happens.